here's how I feel about rich, poor, and middle class. I feel that there's really no such thing as a middle class. I feel that it's an illusion created that isn't actually real. I feel that there's really only rich and poor. And here's how I define the two. The rich are those that are able to take a certain amount of money consistently out of the money they make, reinvest it, and have that become a source of income that builds over time. The poor are people that take all the money they make each month, spend it all, and then continue the cycle over and over again until they die. So you could be making $500,000 a year and be poor if you're spending all your money, or you could be making $100,000 a year and be rich if you're saving, let's say, $50,000 of that. But would you agree with that?
I think that is a definition that could be used in a certain context. But I would personally also consider poor to just be people who can't get the things that they need to live a normal life. But of course, what's normal might be different from me versus you, right? But when I see poor, I'm thinking about people that can't afford a home, people that that can't afford food, people that can't afford basic clothing, things like that. Their kids need certain things for school, they can't afford to buy those things. So maybe if you look at poor as a yes or no answer, then I think that definition that you described could be used, where you do have people that are barely keeping their head above water, and that's a lot of people making a lot of money who are in that situation because they don't understand the value of some sort of temperance when it comes to how you use your money. Because really, it is funny when you talk about rich versus poor. It also makes me think about how a person can be a slave even if they're technically not a slave, right? They're not on the plantation, but you're enslaved by your life if let's say you have bills to the ceiling, you're swamped with debt, and you're barely making enough money to pay your debt and pay your bills. Then you're kind of a slave because you don't have any choice but to get your butt up every day and go to work, and no matter how much you hate the job. So you're kind of a slave at that point. So I think that what you're describing in terms of rich and poor can also be used to describe free versus enslaved, really in a more modernized kind of way. So I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think that if people want to get away from that, one of the easiest ways to build wealth is to stop spending so much money in the first damn place. Realize the difference between what you want and what you need. Understand that these banks want you in debt. They want to cripple you with that. And in fact, for Americans under the age of 35, I think this is the first generation that's going to actually die in debt. The average American under the age of 35, from the last stat I saw, is going to die in debt. And a lot of this is not their fault. It's because they spiraled the cost of education so high that people can't afford it anymore. People can't afford to get sick. So these banks, they lock you down with the debt, just like they do this in India. They'll have a family that's strapped with $1,000 debt, and they're only making $5 a day or something like that. So they'll never be out of debt. So they pretty much have them enslaved for life. The same thing is happening in America, just on a bigger scale. And a lot of it is driven by what I call, if you talk about black people, I talk about black people a lot, I call it black financial addiction. But really you can call it American consumer addiction, if you will. Corporations constantly market things to you and make you believe that you need those things in order to fit in or in order to feel successful or whatever. And so you go out and you're spending your money like crazy on these things that you think you need when you really don't need them. And then you're screwed. But the funny thing is that if you look at most wealthy people, I'm talking about really wealthy people, especially billionaires, a lot of the billionaires I know don't dress like billionaires. They don't try to floss. They don't try to show what they have because they're comfortable with who they are. People that feel like they have to floss and stunt and shine and all these other things to show you how well they're doing, that's really, I think, compensating for something that's missing on the inside. And I think for black people, it's especially detrimental because many of us are born thinking that we're only 3/5 of a human being. I mean, that's what we've been all throughout the history of America. So for us, we attempt to buy our humanity. We think that if I go out and I drive a certain car, live in a certain neighborhood, have a certain house, work for a certain white man, and I'm affiliated with a certain corporation, that I'm a better and more worthy person than I was when I didn't have all of that. And I think that's a dangerous trap for us to fall into because that's why you have so many black people who are making a lot of money, but who are, as Vlad might say, technically poor.
I remember I had a conversation with a professional NBA player. And he said, okay, like in a typical NBA locker room, there's like $300 million a year, roughly. Like, I forgot what the exact number was, but it was something like that. Like, $300 million a year in the room, in the locker room for as many games as they have. And he said not once during the whole time that he's ever played, he played for I think like 10 years. He said not once does he remember a conversation where these guys are talking about how they're investing their money and how they're growing their money. They may talk about a new car they got or a new girl they're dating, but never about actually investing and trying to grow the hundreds of millions of dollars that are in that room. And then I talked to a friend of mine who used to play in the NFL for like 5 years. Same conversation. Baseball player, same conversation. So you have this kind of interesting mentality where people, even when they're making millions of dollars, and then, the average athlete goes broke a few years after they leave the league, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an interesting kind of a thing where, people just don't even, and this is what I mean about the rich and the poor. Like you're rich while you're playing, and you're spending all your money, and you're making millions of dollars. Your income stops, and you have no money that's making money for you.
I would almost say that the tremendous athletic prowess of the black male has been our greatest asset and our greatest curse. It's our greatest curse for a couple reasons. One, because for every one guy who's able to make it to the NBA or NFL, there are 1,000 guys who are almost good enough, right? You're all city, all state, you play in college or whatever. I taught at the University of Kentucky, Ohio State University, Syracuse University. There's no reason that any basketball player in any of those three schools would not have good reason to think that he can make it to the NBA. I mean, you have to be extraordinary just to get to that level. And so what happens, unfortunately, is that there is a culture attached to that where we are tempted to overinvest in our athletic ability at the expense of everything else. And you put all your chips on the table, you put them all on black 22, and then you crap out or whatever, and you lose. And I know I got the game wrong, but you get the point. You lose the game, and then you're stuck with nothing. Next thing you know, you're a 26-year-old with 3 babies, mamas, a bunch of STDs, a weed addiction, and a 4th grade reading level. And I'm not stereotyping, but we know brothers like that. The other interesting issue, the other thing that can make it into a curse, in my opinion, is the fact that a lot of the brothers that get this money in the NBA, they are young. I mean, even myself, when I was 22, 23, you give me $10 million a year, I don't know what I'm going to do with that money. I'm a smart dude. I was teaching college at the age of 22. But if I had that kind of money, I literally would have lost my mind. I mean, the only thing that could have controlled me is if I had a strong father figure who said, no, I'm not letting you have this. I'm going to give you $500,000 a year to do what you want. The rest, I'm going to keep this away from you. That's really what I think some of these guys need. That's what, Shaq had his mother and father right there on top of him because he spent $1 million within the first 30 minutes of the time he joined the NBA. His accountant called him, his mother called him, his father called him and said, you're not doing this, right? A lot of guys don't have that. A lot of these guys don't even have fathers in the home. And that's kind of where we've gotten to, and it's unfortunate. Another thing is that a lot of the brothers, unfortunately, that make it to the NBA, NFL, many of them were either uneducated or miseducated. When I was at University of Kentucky, we had a basketball player who could not read, and people knew he could not read, and they didn't do anything about it because they were about to go to the Final Four, and they knew that the revelation that he couldn't read and couldn't pass his classes would mean that the school wouldn't get that check for $18-20 million at the end of the year. So that's the kind of scandalous nonsense that athletes are put through, in which they are put into the world, into this complex world of high finance, without any preparation whatsoever to deal with that, unless somebody intervenes specifically on their behalf, which happens in maybe 1 out of every 5 cases, right? The other thing that's so unfortunate is that many African American athletes are mentally enslaved. I remember when we were at the University of Kentucky, when I was there as a student, and we had a student protest, a black woman that got attacked with a knife, and I was writing in the campus paper about it, and everybody was talking about it. It was a racially motivated attack. They called her the N-word, all this other stuff. And we asked the athletes to help us out. We were like, look, if you guys speak up on this issue, it'll really make a huge difference. the athletes had no interest in doing anything on behalf of black people. In fact, one of the athletes pulled me to the side and said, he said, the coaches really don't want us reading your articles because you're explaining why college athletes should be getting paid, and they don't want us to even know that. And what I really saw even back then at the age of 24, 25 was that I said, wow, this is deep. This is some real serious brainwashing going on, similar to what you might do if you're training a tiger in the circus. You have to control that tiger's mind, because if he gets any idea that he's really the more powerful one in that relationship, he's going to eat your ass up. Because he's going to realize he shouldn't be in chains. He's going to realize you shouldn't be telling him what to do. He's going to realize you have no right to whip him, and that he's actually the stronger creature of the two. So there is a concerted, consistent effort from the time these kids are 9 years old. They identify them in AAU and all that. There's a consistent, concerted effort to control them and keep them in line. Even back at Syracuse University, when Ernie Davis, I think he won the Heisman at Syracuse. He was one of the great running backs of all time, right after Jim Brown. And he wanted to go march in the civil rights movement. And his coach told him, no, you should do your talking on the football field, which was a bunch of bullshit. So basically what you have is these young guys, many of whom aren't that well educated, who are being controlled mentally. They don't let guys like Boyce Watkins come in the NBA locker room and talk to these guys, or go to a college campus and talk to these athletes, because I have them riled up. I've had prisons that would not allow me to come visit because they didn't want the inmates to hear what I had to say. And it's interesting because I'm not a criminal. I'm not going to go there and tell them to hurt somebody, but I will tell them to empower themselves, right? So you have to think about the fact that this is what happens to these guys. So they get all this money. And I think also being young, you think that these people love you when they really don't. And what happens every time, in my opinion, is that these guys, they go through the system screws them. Most of the time they just learn it from college, because most of them never get to the NBA. But they do either their time in college, and they maybe get a little time in the pros, and then by the time they're 27, 28, 29, they start to look back and reflect on everything that happened, during this time where they thought the world loved them, and they realize, wait a minute, I was fucked. Somebody screwed me in this situation. And then they start to get upset about it, but by that time it's too late. Like E40 the rapper always said, they'll find a new nigga next year. And they do that in hip hop, they do that in sports, and I think black men have to speak up against this stuff, or it's going to continue to happen. So fortunately, now I think we live in the age of the internet where you can't keep a voice like mine quiet. There are other voices out here that are saying the same thing, and I think guys are figuring it out and they're wising it up. Because not everybody's falling for the okie doke, but there are always going to be guys who are still gonna believe the myth, and I feel bad for them. But I see a lot of brothers who are taking a different route, so I think that there's hope in that situation.
Where we are as men, we just understand the equity in our relationship. You know what I'm saying? And the good outweigh the bad.
Okay, we can't hate on her, so let's say she has AIDS. Okay, now let's call her a fat bitch. Like, well, you already said I had AIDS, and so you think you calling me a fat bitch is gonna really hurt me?